there's a gene missing. But in mental disease, we haven't found one gene yet where we can really say what's wrong.
And it was this desire to find the genes that caused mental illness that took Jim Watson all the way to the United States Congress to ask for the $3 billion necessary to map the human genome. And now it's done. This work enables scientists to read through the entire genetic code that makes a person. Now they can search for any human gene. They're moving beyond simple genetic mistakes that cause Down's syndrome and cystic fibrosis to more complex traits. They will pinpoint the genes responsible for everything in our nature, whether we're likely to be gay or straight, fat or thin, suffer from depression, or have a high IQ. And recently, the first gene involved in mental illness has been found. But this opens up another set of moral dilemmas. Should prospective parents be given this kind of information about their unborn child? And where do you draw the line? Consider manic depression. Watson suggested we visit Kay Jamison. We asked her to draw her family tree. The crosshatches represent manic depression. The stars, suicide attempts.
My brother, who's very normal. Myself, who is not. Suicide attempt. My sister. My father. My father's mother. Her brother, who was in an asylum most of his adult life. Let's see, many of my cousins affected by this, and my cousins' children continue to have problems. I have the same illness. My sister has the same illness. So if you just look at that side of the family tree, it's just saturated.
Eugenicists like Charles Davenport were right. Mental illness often does run in families. Listening to Kay, one might wonder how far society has come since the days of people like Davenport.
I went in to see a doctor, and the doctor took a family history and knew I had manic depression and told me that I should never have children because I had manic depressive illness. And it was one of the more upsetting things I had been through in terms of just an experience with another person. I couldn't believe, first of all, I couldn't believe the cruelty, because it was said with such a level of certainty. There was not any question of being wrong. I mean, he absolutely knew that what he was saying was correct from his point of view, that I had a very bad psychiatric illness, and I should not let loose into the world any more people that had those genes. I wasn't asking his permission to have children. It didn't strike me that it was any of his business. And I told him to go to hell. I also told him that I was the director of the mood disorders clinic at UCLA, and I was completely aware that it was a genetic illness.
Kay Jamison isn't just a patient with manic depression. She's also arguably the world expert on the subject. She's a psychologist and has written a definitive textbook on manic depression, as well as a best-selling autobiography about her experience of the illness. She knows.
When people assault your genes, it's just like saying you ought not to have been born.
One of her recent books examines the link between manic depression and creativity.
When you're talking about genius, I think you're talking about people who are, by definition, it's a very unusual set of circumstances that leads to that kind of mind and ability.
So does Watson's way take into account the positive sides of something like manic depression?
I think it's something it's a hard argument. If you wanted to say, well, what percentage of human creativity is associated with manic depressive illness? No idea. I think there'd be a lot of creativity without it.
if you look at the scientific literature, there are more than 20 studies showing a very much elevated rate of depression and manic depression in people who are highly creative.
What Kay knows is that all these people were manic depressives, so there's a risk that Watson's science could deprive the world of these extraordinary people. Watson argues that this doesn't make up for the misery that goes with it.
This is sort of saying, what's more important, what's good for the country or what is good for the individual? And my way was always asking what's good for the individual. I mean, someone would say, well, our society would be greatly impoverished if there were no homosexuals. But would you make someone be born homosexual because they're good for society, knowing the difficulties it's likely to impose in their lives? I certainly wouldn't use that argument. I would go back to it. I don't see how you could decide the answer, and best to let parents decide. I think most families that have manic depressive disease would decide to have children without it. So that's about all. It's a terrible curse.
I think that parents will be diverse in what they choose. I think if I thought every parent would come down with a decision not to have any manic depressive illness floating around in the genes, I would find that disturbing, because I do think that diversity is important.
For Watson, whether manic depressives become an endangered species will depend on the parents of the future. And he asks, would you want a child who could be highly creative but might be suicidal? Or would you just want to ensure your child was healthy?
Yeah.
There is another, more radical way that DNA science could deal with Watson's unfit. Instead of aborting them, people could be genetically engineered. Since the Human Genome Project, DNA science has gathered pace. And now, if you have the money, you can get a printout of your own genetic code. These are some of the G's, A's, T's, and C's that make a Jim Watson. Now imagine you could change these letters around. Maybe people could even make themselves more intelligent or better looking. But should science be used in this way? This is what the scientists call the question of enhancement.
Oh, I think people who say we should try and enhance people in the future haven't thought it through. We're always trying to enhance things, and suddenly they say, oh, you can't enhance your genes. Well, that sort of says something, mystical about it, as if you don't, it's the Holy Grail, or it's some, out of King Arthur's court, you're not going to mess with it.
That might sound like science fiction, but not if you meet one of Jim's former students, the next generation of DNA scientist, Mario Capecci.
Jim was a very important influence on my life. Literally, we live in the future, and we imagine things, and we dream about things.
He has his own billion-dollar enterprise, the genetic enhancement of mice. And the reason he does that is to develop the technology for use in people. The process begins with this machine. The bottles at the bottom are full of the ingredients of the genetic code, because this machine can make DNA.
This is an automatic DNA synthesizer, and what you can see here are the nucleotides A, G, C, and T. And so what this machine can do, we can program it to put in, as we're synthesizing the DNA, we can specifically put in A at this position, then a C at the next position, and a T and so on, and then thereby resynthesize a part of a gene. And so in essence, we have the capability of changing the genome in any way we see fit.